My son begged me to fly north for the holidays. I'm Aaron Schuster. I'm 68. And like a fool, I actually thought this Christmas might be different. He called me in Florida at 10:30 at night, laying on the guilt about how much the grandkids missed me and how they just wanted a real family Christmas. 10 hours of travel with bad sciatica, 2 layovers, and $1,000 spent on gifts. And I still showed up on his doorstep in Chicago with a smile, ready to be the grandma they claimed they wanted. I was exhausted, my ankles were swollen, and my back was screaming. I walked into that kitchen stupidly hoping for a hot meal and a thank you. Instead, I saw suitcases packed by the door. No, welcome home. No, rest your feet, Mom. Just my son and his wife dressed for a tropical vacation, staring at me like I was the hired help. You're watching the kids. We're going to Cabo. My daughter-in-law didn't even look up from her phone. She just rolled her eyes and delivered the line that sealed her fate. Oh, relax. It's quality time with your grandkids. And don't expect to get paid. Old lady, you have nothing else to do anyway. They both laughed like I was a senile piece of furniture they could just park in the corner. My son, his wife, cracking up while I stood there with my expensive gifts and a heart full of betrayal. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I smiled, took the emergency credit card they left me, and decided to teach them a lesson they would never forget. Stay with me until the end, and I'll tell you exactly how one old lady ruined her ungrateful family's holiday and reclaimed her dignity. It was 10:30 at night. Now, if you're my age, you know that a phone ringing at 10:30 p.m. isn't a social call. It's an emergency. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached for the receiver. I was already running through the list of people who might have died or ended up in the hospital. Hello. I answered, my voice shaking a little. Hey, Mom, did I wake you? The relief washed over me so fast I almost sat down. It was Louis, my youngest. He has this voice that just melts you even when he's 40 years old. He sounds just like his father did when he was trying to talk his way out of trouble. No, Louis, I'm up. I lied. I was in my robe, ready for bed. But I wasn't going to tell him that. Is everything okay? The kids? Everything's great, Mom. Better than great. I was just sitting here with Rachel, and we were talking about you. I paused. That didn't sound right. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, didn't talk about me. In fact, in the 10 years they've been married, I don't think Rachel has ever started a conversation with me that didn't involve asking for a recipe or checking if a check had cleared. She wasn't mean exactly. She was just indifferent. I was the old woman in Florida who sent birthday checks, not a part of her daily life. Rachel was talking about me. I asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Yeah, Louis said, and his voice dropped into that warm, persuasive tone I knew so well. She was saying how it just doesn't feel like Christmas without you. The kids are getting big, Mom. Sophie is 8 now, and Ben just turned 6. They barely remember the last time you were here. We miss you. We miss you. Those 3 words are dangerous. They act like a key, unlocking all the doors you promised yourself you'd keep shut. I knew travel was hard on me. I knew my sciatica had been acting up since November. I knew my bank account was a little tighter than usual because of the new roof I had to pay for last spring. But my son said he missed me. I miss you too, Lou, I said softly. But Chicago in December, you know how the cold gets into my bones. I know, he said quickly, but we'll keep you warm. We've got the guest room set up perfectly. Rachel even bought those flannel sheets you like. Look, Mom, we just want a real family Christmas. We want the kids to wake up and see Grandma. Please, let me book the flight. Just say yes. My mind flashed to my bank balance. Louis said he'd book the flight, but I knew how this worked. He'd put it on his card, and then mention casually how tight money was until I wrote him a check to cover it. Or he'd book the cheapest, most miserable connection possible, and I'd end up paying the difference to upgrade to a seat where my knees didn't hit my chin. I can book my own flight, Louis, I said. It was a reflex. I didn't want to be a burden. Are you sure Rachel is okay with this? She's the one who suggested it, he insisted. She wants you here, Mom. We all do. I looked around my empty living room. The Christmas tree I had put up, a small, artificial one on a tabletop, looked pathetic. Okay, I said. Okay, I'll come. The next 3 days were a blur of expensive decisions. I found a flight, but because it was so close to the holidays, the price was astronomical. $600 for a coach seat. I winced when I clicked purchase, but I told myself it was worth it. Then came the gifts. I couldn't show up empty-handed. I went to the mall, fighting the crowds, buying the expensive Lego sets Ben wanted and the designer doll Sophie had asked for. Another $400 gone. By the time I packed my suitcase, I was over $1,000 in the hole, but I felt that warm glow of anticipation. I was going to be grandma. I was going to bake cookies and read stories. I was going to be part of a family again. The travel day was a nightmare, just as I expected. I woke up at 4 a.m. to catch the early flight. The line at security was wrapped around the terminal. I stood there for 45 minutes, shifting my weight from one hip to the other, trying to keep the shooting pain in my lower back from showing on my face. I took off my shoes, unpacked my liquids, and shuffled through the scanner like cattle. The first flight was delayed on the tarmac for an hour. The second flight, the long one to O'Hare, was completely full. I was squeezed into a middle seat between a man who smelled like stale onions and a teenager who kept elbowing me every time he texted. My back seized up somewhere over Kentucky. By the time we started our descent into Chicago, my ankles were swollen, my neck was stiff, and I was exhausted down to my soul. It had taken 10 hours of travel to get there, 10 hours of discomfort, 10 hours of navigating airports that seemed designed to confuse seniors. I dragged my heavy suitcase off the carousel, my arm trembling from the effort. But as I walked toward the sliding glass doors to the passenger pickup area, I straightened my posture. I fixed my hair. I put a smile on my face that I didn't quite feel yet. I ignored the pain in my back and the exhaustion in my legs. I was here. I was doing this for Louis. I was doing this for the grandkids. It didn't matter how hard the journey was or how much it cost. It's what mothers do. We show up. We make the effort. We swallow the pain because the reward is seeing those little faces light up when you walk through the door. I stood on the curb in the freezing Chicago wind, shivering in my Florida coat, waiting for my son's car to pull up. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and held on to that hope. They wanted me here. They missed me. This was going to be a wonderful holiday. I had no idea that I was just the help they hadn't paid for yet. When Louis's car finally pulled up to the curb at O'Hare, I was shivering so hard my teeth were practically chattering. I hauled my suitcase into the trunk myself while he stayed in the driver's seat, keeping the heater running. He popped the trunk for me, which I suppose counts as helping, but as I lifted that 40-pound bag with my bad back, I felt a pinch of annoyance. I pushed it down immediately. Don't start, I told myself. He's probably just tired from work. When I climbed into the passenger seat, the warmth of the car hit me, and so did Louis's smile. Hey, Mom, you made it. He leaned over and gave me a one-armed hug. He smelled like expensive cologne and peppermint. For a second, just a second, I felt that old rush of motherly love. He was my baby boy. You look good, Mom. Sarasota agrees with you. I'm hanging in there, I said, rubbing my frozen hands together. It's good to see you, Lou. The drive to the suburbs was filled with small talk. He asked about the weather in Florida, asked about my neighbor's dog, surface level things. He didn't ask about my health or how I was managing the house alone. But again, I excused it. Men don't always think about those things. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked beautiful. It's a big, 2-story brick house with a 3-car garage. I remember when they bought it, I sent them $5,000 for the closing costs because they were just a little short. Seeing it now, with lights strung up along the gutters, I felt a swell of pride. I helped build this life for them. "Come on in," Louis said, unlocking the front door. "Rachel and the kids are waiting." I walked in, expecting the smell of a pot roast or maybe something baking. Instead, the air smelled like pepperoni and cardboard. On the granite island in their massive kitchen, there was a stack of 3 greasy pizza boxes. "Hey, Aaron," Rachel called out from the living room. She didn't get up. She was sitting on the sectional sofa, scrolling on her phone. "Sorry about the mess. We didn't have time to cook, so we just grabbed Domino's." "That's fine," I said, forcing a smile. I tried to ignore the fact that I had just traveled 10 hours and was hoping for a real meal. "Pizza is a treat." "Grandma." That was the best part. Sophie and Ben looked up from their tablets. For about 5 minutes, it was exactly what I wanted. They hugged me, they asked if I brought presents, and they showed me their loose teeth. I felt needed. I felt loved. We sat around the kitchen island eating lukewarm pizza on paper plates. I reached into my bag and pulled out the gifts. I had wrapped them beautifully in gold paperback in Sarasota, worrying about crushing the bows in my suitcase the whole trip. "Here you go," I said, handing Ben the big Lego set. "And for you, Sophie." They tore into the paper like wild animals. Ben saw the box, the Star Wars shit that cost me $150, and shouted, "Cool." He opened it immediately, spilling 1,000 plastic pieces onto the floor. Sophie looked at her doll, said, "Thanks," and then immediately looked back at her iPad. "Say thank you properly." Louis mumbled around a mouthful of crust, but he didn't look up from his phone either. "Thank you, Grandma," they chorused, eyes already back on their screens. By 9 p.m., I was fading fast. My back was screaming at me. "I think I'm going to turn in," I said. "Where should I sleep?" "Guest room is ready," Rachel said, finally looking up. "Oh, and Aaron, the coffee maker is a little tricky. Don't touch it in the morning, okay? Louis will make it when he gets up. We don't want it broken." "Okay," I said. "Good night, everyone." No one really said good night back. They were all absorbed in their devices. I walked up the stairs, my suitcase thumping against each step, and found the guest room. The flannel sheets Louis had promised were actually thin cotton, and the room was freezing, but I was too tired to care. I crawled into bed, telling myself that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow we would have breakfast. We would talk. We would be a family. I woke up at 6 a.m. It's a habit I can't break. The house was silent. I lay there for an hour, staring at the ceiling, waiting for signs of life. My back was stiff as a board. Finally, around 7 o'clock, I heard movement downstairs. I put on my robe and slippers and went down. I was careful not to touch the tricky coffee machine. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. 10 minutes later, Louis and Rachel walked into the kitchen. I blinked. They weren't wearing pajamas. They weren't wearing robes. Louis was wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt. Rachel was wearing a sundress and a wide-brimmed straw hat. "Good morning," I said, confused. "Is the heat broken? You two look like you're dressed for summer." Louis wouldn't meet my eyes. He busied himself with the coffee machine. Rachel, however, was applying lipstick in the reflection of the microwave. "Morning, Mom," Louis said, his back to me. "Here's some coffee." He slid a mug toward me. "What's going on?" I asked. I looked toward the front door and saw it. for large suitcases stood by the door. Not carry-ons. Big, checked baggage suitcases. So, here's the thing, Louis said, finally turning around. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. It was a defensive posture. I knew it well. Rachel and I have been really stressed lately. Work has been a nightmare. The kids have been a handful. We really needed a break. My stomach dropped. A break. We booked a trip to Cabo, Rachel said, snapping her lipstick shut. She turned to me with a bright, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Our flight leaves in 3 hours. I sat there, gripping my warm mug, trying to process the words. Cabo? In Mexico? But I just got here. You said we were going to have a family Christmas. We will. Louis said quickly. When we get back. We'll be back on the 26th. You'll be here with the kids. It's perfect, Mom. You get to spend all that quality time with them, just like you wanted. The room seemed to tilt. You're leaving me here? Alone? With the children? They're not difficult, Aaron, Rachel said, her tone sharpening. They have their iPads. Just feed them, and make sure they don't burn the house down. The fridge is stocked. Well, mostly stocked. You might need to grab milk. I felt the blood rushing to my face. Louis, I said, my voice trembling. I traveled 10 hours yesterday. My back is in spasms. I spent $1,000 to come see you. You didn't tell me I was coming here to work. It's not work, it's family, Louis said, looking annoyed now. Why do you always have to make things difficult? We haven't had a vacation in 2 years. You called me crying, I said, standing up. You said you missed me. You lied to me. Rachel stepped forward then. The fake smile was gone. Her face was hard, cold. Look, she said, we need this. You're already here. What are you going to do? Turn around and fly home. You can't afford another ticket right now. She knew. She knew exactly what my finances were because Louis told her everything. So you flew me here to babysit. I said flatly, we flew you here to help. Louis corrected, though he looked at the floor. And don't think this is a paid gig. Rachel laughed, a short, sharp sound that felt like a slap. She picked up her purse. Don't expect to get paid. Old lady, you have nothing else to do anyway. It's not like you have a job to get back to. You're just sitting in that house in Florida, waiting to die. At least here you're useful. The air left the room. Waiting to die. I looked at my son. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to tell his wife not to speak to his mother that way. Louis just checked his watch. We gotta go, Ratch. Uber is 5 minutes out. He looked at me one last time. Thanks, Mom. We really appreciate it. The emergency number is on the fridge. Don't call unless someone is bleeding, okay? International roaming is expensive. They grabbed the suitcases. The wheels rumbled loudly over the hardwood floors, a sound that felt like thunder. The front door opened. A blast of icy wind hit me, and then the door slammed shut. I stood in the silence of the kitchen, wearing my robe, holding a cooling cup of coffee. They hadn't even said goodbye to the kids. I walked to the window and watched them load the bags into the Uber. They were laughing. Rachel showed Louis something on her phone, and he threw his head back in delight. They looked happy. They looked free. They looked like two people who had just successfully dumped their trash. I turned away from the window and looked at the messy kitchen. Pizza boxes from last night were still on the counter. The sink was full of dishes. Upstairs, 2 children were waking up, expecting their parents, and I was the only one here. Old lady, I whispered to myself. I felt something hot and hard settle in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something else. They thought I had nothing else to do. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was just a resource to be mined until I ran dry. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter. We'll see about that, I said to the empty room. The sound of the front door locking clicked into place, and then there was just silence. It wasn't the peaceful silence of my garden in Florida. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, staring at the wood grain of the door. The house was still vibrating with the chaos of their departure. They had left a trail of destruction behind them, shoes kicked off in the hallway, half-empty coffee mugs on the counters, and a general sense of panic that always seemed to follow Louie and Rachel. I walked into the living room. The TV was on, playing some loud cartoon, but neither of the children was watching it. Sophie was curled up in the corner of the oversized beige sectional, her face illuminated by the blue light of her iPad. Ben was lying on his stomach on the rug, tapping furiously at a Nintendo Switch. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice bright, it looks like it's just us. Neither of them looked up. I was thinking, I continued, stepping further into the room. Maybe we could make some hot chocolate, or we could bundle up and go for a walk. I saw a park down the street. When we drove in, Sophie didn't even blink. Mom said we're allowed to have screen time until lunch because you're tired. I'm not that tired, I said, though my back was throbbing. We're in the middle of a game. Grandma, Ben said without pausing his tapping. We can't stop now. I stood there, feeling like a ghost in my own son's house. They had been coached. Don't bother Grandma. Keep quiet. Let us escape. I turned and walked into the kitchen. It was a disaster zone. The sink was piled high with dishes from breakfast and probably dinner the night before. The granite countertops were sticky. On the island, right next to a pile of unopened mail, sat a single piece of paper and a credit card. I picked up the note. It was written in Rachel's looping handwriting. Aaron, here is the schedule for the kids. Ben has a nut allergy, no peanuts. Sophie needs her inhaler if she runs too much. Bedtime is 8:30 sharp. The credit card is for emergencies only. There is food in the freezer. Please don't order out. It's too expensive. Thanks. R. I looked at the card. It was a secondary card on their account with my name on it. They had given it to me years ago, just in case, but I had never used it. Not once. I held it in my hand, feeling the cold plastic. Emergencies only. I looked around the kitchen. It was a beautiful kitchen. Stainless steel appliances, custom cabinets, an island big enough to land a plane on. It was the kind of kitchen I had dreamed of having my whole life, but never could afford. And then the memories started to flood in. They hit me like a physical blow. I looked at the refrigerator, a massive double-door beast that probably cost $3,000. I remembered the phone call 2 years ago. Louis sounded frantic. Mom, the fridge died, and we lost all the food. We don't have the cash to replace it until bonus season. Can you help? I had sent them $800 that afternoon. I looked at the sliding glass doors leading to the backyard. I remembered the summer before last. Mom, the sliding door is jammed, and it's a safety hazard for the kids. It's going to cost $1,200 to fix. I dipped into my rainy day fund. I sent the check. My eyes wandered to the garage door. Last winter, Rachel had called me crying. The transmission on the minivan blew. Aaron, I can't get the kids to school. We're so broke right now with the mortgage rate going up. I had wired them $2,000. $2,000 that I had been saving to get my own teeth fixed. I put off my dental crown for another year so Rachel could drive a working car. I sat down heavily on one of the bar stools. The silence of the house suddenly felt very loud because my brain was screaming. I started doing the math. I had never done it before. I always told myself that family doesn't keep score. Mothers don't keep receipts. You give because you love them. You give because you want their lives to be easier than yours was. But sitting there, holding that emergency-only credit card. I started to tally it up. The mortgage help when Louis was between jobs, $4,500. The car repairs over the last 5 years, $3,000. The loans for Christmas presents so the kids wouldn't be disappointed, $1,500. The plane ticket I just bought to come here, $600. The gifts in my suitcase, $400. I had poured over $10,000 into this household in the last few years. I lived on a fixed income. I clipped coupons. I turned my air conditioning off during the day to save on electric bills. I wore shoes until the soles wore through. I did all of that so they could live in this big house, so they could drive nice cars, and apparently, so they could afford a $5,000 trip to Cabo while I babysat for free. I wasn't a matriarch. I wasn't a cherished grandmother. I was a resource. I was an ATM that also changed diapers. They didn't invite me here because they missed me. They invited me here because a kennel for the dog and a nanny for the kids would have cost them $2,000 for the week. I was the cheaper option. I was the free option. And the worst part, I had taught them to treat me this way. Every time I said yes without asking questions, I taught them I had no boundaries. Every time I sent a check, instantly, I taught them my money was their money. Every time I smiled when they insulted me, I taught them that my dignity didn't matter. Don't expect to get paid. Old lady, Rachel had said. The words echoed in my head, bouncing off the stainless steel appliances I helped pay for. I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled, spotted with age, and shaking slightly. But they weren't shaking from fear anymore. They were shaking from rage. I looked over at the living room. The backs of my grandchildren's heads were barely visible over the couch. They were good kids, but they were being raised to be just like their parents, takers. If I stayed here for the next 7 days, cooking their meals, cleaning their messes, and saving their parents' money, what was I teaching them? I was teaching them that grandma is a doormat. I was teaching them that you can use people and discard them when you're done. I took a deep breath. The air in the house felt stale, but inside me, something fresh was waking up. It was a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't going to cry. I had spent enough years crying over Louis's neglect. I wasn't going to yell. Yelling just makes you look crazy, and they would just tell everyone that Mom is losing it. No, I needed to do something they would understand. I needed to speak their language, and their language was money. I looked at the credit card in my hand again. Emergencies only. Well, I thought, this feels like an emergency to me. My self-respect was in critical condition. My dignity was on life support. I stood up from the stool. The pain in my back was still there, but I barely felt it. I felt light. I felt dangerous. I walked over to the trash can where Louis had thrown the pizza boxes. I saw the receipt from the liquor store peeking out from the recycling bin. Expensive champagne. They had celebrated last night. They had toasted to their clever plan. Let's get Mom down here, dump the kids, and run. I wasn't sad anymore. The sadness had evaporated, leaving behind a core of solid steel. I walked back to the living room. Kids, I said. My voice was different now. It was firmer, stronger. They both looked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Grandma? Sophie asked, lowering her iPad. Pack your backpacks, I said calmly. We aren't staying here. Where are we going? Ben asked, looking confused. I'm not sure yet. I lied. I knew exactly what I was going to do, but I'm not spending Christmas being the help. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the credit card. I tapped it against the granite countertop. Tap, tap, tap. It was time to balance the ledger. I stood in that kitchen, the nerve center of the home I had helped subsidize, and I looked at the credit card in my hand. It was a platinum card, heavy and sleek. My name was embossed on the front, right below Louie's. Aaron Schuster. It looked official. It looked like I was a partner in this life. But I knew the truth now. I wasn't a partner. I was a silent investor who never got any returns. I walked over to the pile of mail on the island. I don't usually snoop. I was raised to believe that other people's mail is private. But the rules had changed the moment they walked out that door and left me hostage. I shuffled through the envelopes, bills, catalogs, credit card offers. And then I saw it, a thick envelope from a travel agency. It was already ripped open. I pulled out the itinerary. It was printed on glossy paper. The Grand Velas Resort, Cabo San Lucas. I put on my reading glasses, my hands shaking just a little, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of discovery. I scanned down to the bottom line. Total cost, $5,240. I stared at that number, $5,240. The air in the kitchen seemed to get thinner. I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep my knees steady. Just last month, 4 weeks ago, Louis had called me. He sounded so stressed. He told me the mortgage rate adjustment was killing them. He said they were cutting back on groceries. He said he didn't know how they were going to give the kids a Christmas. I had hung up the phone with tears in my eyes, sick with worry for my son. I went to my bank the next morning and transferred $1,200. It was money I had set aside for my own car insurance, but I figured I could just drive less. I figured they needed it more. They took my $1,200, and then they booked a $5,000 vacation. They didn't just lie to me. They stole from me. They stole my security. They stole my peace of mind. And they used my sympathy as the weapon to do it. I looked over at the living room. Ben was still tapping away at his game. Sophie was watching a video. They were safe for the moment. I sat down at the kitchen table with the itinerary in one hand and the credit card in the other. The old Aaron would have called Louis right now. I would have screamed. I would have cried. I would have asked, "How could you do this to me?" But what would that achieve? Louis would just gaslight me. He'd say it was a business expense or a gift from a client, or tell me I was being dramatic. He would talk over me until I felt guilty for asking. And then I'd still be stuck here, babysitting his children for a week while he drank margaritas on a beach I paid for. No, I was done with screaming. Screaming is for people who want to be heard. I didn't want to be heard. I wanted to be felt. I needed a plan. I couldn't just leave the children alone. That would be child abandonment. I loved my grandkids, and I wasn't going to put them in danger just to teach their parents a lesson. But I also wasn't going to spend my holidays scrubbing floors and making macaroni and cheese for free. I needed a replacement. I pulled out my smartphone. It's an older model, a little cracked on the screen, but it works fine. I opened Google and typed Emergency Nanny Service Chicago. A list popped up. I skipped past the college students looking for extra cash. I didn't want a teenager. I wanted a professional. I wanted the best. I scrolled down to an agency called Elite Nanny and Domestic Staffing. Their website boasted about serving Chicago's Gold Coast families and providing white-glove childcare. It looked expensive. Perfect. I dialed the number. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was smooth, professional, and sounded like money. Elite Staffing, this is Victoria. How may I assist you? Hello, Victoria, I said, channeling the voice I used to use when I had to deal with contractors. My name is Aaron. I find myself in a bit of a predicament. My son and his wife have been called away on urgent business for the week. I am the grandmother, but I have a medical condition that prevents me from providing full-time care. I need a nanny. Immediately. I see, Victoria said. We do offer emergency placement, but I must inform you that holiday weeks are our peak season. Our rates are significantly higher for last-minute bookings. I understand, I said calmly. Cost is not an issue. I need someone experienced, someone who can cook, help with homework, and keep the children entertained for the next 7 days. 24-hour care would be preferable. 24-hour care. Victoria sounded interested now. We have a holiday au pair package. We send one of our senior nannies. She will stay at the residence. She manages meals, activities, and hygiene. It essentially replaces the parents for the duration. That sounds exactly like what we need. I said, how soon can you send someone? I have a candidate, Mrs. Albright, who just finished a contract. She could be there in 2 hours. But I have to be transparent about the fee for the holiday week, plus the emergency placement fee, and the 24-hour rate. You're looking at roughly $4,000 for the week. $4,000. My heart didn't even flutter. That sounds reasonable, I said. Do you take credit cards? We do. We require payment in full upfront for emergency placements. Excellent, I said. I have the card ready. I read her the numbers from the card Louis had left on the counter. The card for emergencies only. I read the expiration date. I read the security code on the back. One moment while I processed that. Victoria said, I held my breath. For a second, I wondered if the card had a limit. I wondered if it would decline. Approved, Victoria said. Mrs. Albright will be there by 1 p.m. I'll email you the contract and her profile. Thank you, Victoria. You've been a lifesaver. I hung up the phone. I looked at the credit card. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It was power. I had just spent $4,000 of my son's money in 5 minutes, and I wasn't done yet. I walked back into the living room. Okay, kids, I said, clapping my hands together. Pause the games for a second. Grandma has an announcement. They looked up, wary. Grandma has to go to a hotel, I said. My back is hurting very badly, and the bed here isn't helping. So I hired a professional nanny, a nice lady named Mrs. Albright, to come and hang out with you guys for the week. She's going to take you to the movies, order pizza, and play whatever games you want. Ben's eyes lit up. Can she play Mario Kart? I bet she can learn, I said. Is she strict? Sophie asked suspiciously. She's very nice, I assured them. And she's getting paid to be nice, which means you guys are going to have a great week. I went back upstairs to the guest room. I packed my suitcase. It took me 10 minutes. I didn't bother folding things neatly. I just threw them in. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. I looked at the cold, impersonal room where they had stashed me. They thought they could park me here like an old car. They thought I would just absorb the disrespect because I was mom, because I was grandma, because I was old lady. They forgot that before I was any of those things, I was a person, and people have breaking points. I checked my phone. I had a confirmation email from Elite Staffing. The charge was processed for $1,150. I opened the calculator app on my phone. Flight, $600. Gifts, $400. Past loans, $10,000 plus. Nanny, $4,150. I was starting to get my money back, but the money was just the beginning. The real payment was going to be the lesson. I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. I could hear a car pulling into the driveway. Mrs. Albright was early. Perfect. I walked down the stairs, my suitcase thumping behind me, but this time the weight didn't bother me at all. I felt lighter than I had in years. I was about to give my son the most expensive Christmas present he had ever received. Consequences. The doorbell rang at exactly 12:55 p.m. Punctuality is something I respect, and Mrs. Albright was right on time. When I opened the door, I didn't see a college student in sweatpants or a tired teenager. I saw a woman who looked like she ran a small country. She was wearing a crisp navy blazer, sensible shoes, and carried a leather satchel that looked like it meant business. "Mrs. Schuster?" she asked. Her voice was calm and commanding. "I'm Mrs. Albright from Elite Staffing." "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. I spent the next 20 minutes vetting her. I might be angry at my son, but I wasn't going to leave my grandchildren with a stranger without making sure they were safe. I checked her ID. I looked at her CPR certification card. I asked her what she would do if Ben had an allergic reaction. She answered every question perfectly. She was a professional. She cost $4,000 a week. And frankly, she seemed worth every penny. "I have one more request," I said, leading her into the kitchen. "The children are upset that their parents left. I want to make sure this week is a treat for them, not a punishment. Did you get the add-ons I requested over the phone?" Mrs. Albright smiled, and for the first time, she looked like a grandmother herself. "I did. The agency concierge picked them up on the way." She opened her large tote bag and pulled out 2 brand-new Nintendo Switch games and a gift card for the local pizza place. I had charged all of it to the card before she arrived. "Perfect," I said. We walked into the living room. "Kids," I called out, "this is Mrs. Albright. She's going to be staying with you." Sophie looked up, ready to complain, but then Mrs. Albright placed the new Mario game on the coffee table. "Your grandmother told me you were excellent drivers," Mrs. Albright said smoothly. "I was hoping you could teach me how to play." Ben's eyes went wide. "You play Mario?" "I'm a level 50 racer." She lied effortlessly, or maybe she wasn't lying. For the price I was paying, maybe she was an esports champion. The kids were instantly won over. They didn't even look at me. They were too busy tearing the plastic off the new games. I felt a twinge of sadness, just a small one, that they were so easily bought. But then I remembered who raised them. They were used to affection being shown through purchases. I was just speaking their language. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything," Mrs. Albright told them. Then she turned to me. "You should go, Mrs. Schuster. You look exhausted. We have it from here." "Thank you," I said. I went back to the kitchen for the final act. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a problem solved. I cleared a space on the granite island, right in the center where they couldn't miss it. I reached into my purse and pulled out a notepad. I sat down and began to write. I didn't write a letter about my feelings. I didn't write about how much they hurt me. Emotions are messy, and Louie and Rachel were experts at twisting emotions until I was the one apologizing. No, I dealt in facts now. I created a spreadsheet by hand. I drew neat columns with a black pen. November 2023. Item, mortgage assistance. Amount, $1,200. July 2024. Item, minivan transmission repair. Amount, $2,000. December 2024. Item, emergency fridge replacement. Amount, $800. December 2025. Item, flights and gifts for family Christmas. Amount, $1,000. Today. Item, premium nanny services, 1 week. Amount, $4,150. I drew a line at the bottom and tallied it up. Total family support provided, $9,150. I looked at the number. It was staggering. That was a new car. That was a trip to Europe. That was my security blanket for old age. I had given it all to them, and they had thanked me by calling me an old lady and leaving me to work. I tore the page out of the notebook and placed it in the center of the island. Then, I took the platinum credit card, the one with my name on it, the one they used to tether me to them, to make me feel like I was part of the team, while they drained me dry. I opened the kitchen drawer and found the poultry shears, heavy, sharp scissors meant for cutting through bone. I held the card over the note. I didn't hesitate. Snip. The sound was loud in the empty kitchen. The plastic crunched and severed. One half fell onto the paper, then the other. I placed the shears next to the pieces. It looked like a crime scene, but the only thing I had killed was my own gullibility. I took the pen one last time and wrote a note on a separate sticky note. I stuck it right on top of the cut card. I am retired. The nanny is paid. Good luck. That was it. No love, Mom. No call me. Just the facts. I checked my phone. My Uber was 2 minutes away. I walked to the front door. I put on my coat and wrapped my scarf tight. I could hear the sounds of video game noises and laughter coming from the living room. My grandchildren were happy. They were safe. They were fed. I had fulfilled my obligations. I opened the front door and stepped out into the biting Chicago wind. But for the first time since I landed, the cold didn't bother me. I felt hot with adrenaline. The Uber driver was a nice man named Khalid. He popped the trunk for my suitcase. Heading to the airport, he asked as I climbed in. I looked back at the big brick house. I looked at the wreath on the door. I looked at the life my son had built on my back. No, I said, buckling my seatbelt. Take me to the Palmer House Hilton. Downtown. Khalid raised an eyebrow. Going to be fancy tonight? Yes, I said, leaning back against the seat. I'm on vacation. The ride into the city was a blur of gray highways and skyscrapers, but my mind was crystal clear. I pulled up the reservation on my phone. I had booked a room with a king-sized bed and a soaking tub. It was costing me $300 a night, and I was paying for it with my own money I wasn't going to send to Louis anymore. When we pulled up to the hotel, the doorman opened the door for me. The lobby was decked out in Christmas decorations, gold ribbons, massive trees, lights everywhere. It was warm and smelled like cinnamon and expensive perfume. I checked in. The receptionist smiled at me. Welcome, Mrs. Schuster. You're staying with us for the week. Yes, I said, and I'd like to book a massage at the spa for tomorrow morning, and a dinner reservation for 1. Certainly. I went up to my room on the 14th floor. It was beautiful. Silence. Pure, luxurious silence. No screaming kids. No disrespectful daughter-in-law. No son manipulating me for cash. I walked to the window and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, in that cold suburb, Mrs. Albright was earning her fee. Somewhere further away, in a sunny resort in Mexico, Louis and Rachel were probably ordering their second round of drinks, thinking they had pulled off the perfect scam. I let out a long breath. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. I took off my shoes and sank into the armchair by the window. I closed my eyes. The war wasn't over. I knew the phone calls would start soon, but the first battle was won. I had fired myself as their doormat. And tomorrow, Louis was going to find out that the Bank of Mom was permanently closed. It was around 8 p.m. in Chicago when I finally settled into my hotel room. The silence was luxurious. I had ordered room service, a club sandwich and a pot of chamomile tea, and I was sitting in a plush white robe by the window, watching the snow start to fall over the city lights. I was warm. I was fed. And for the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about anyone else's dinner. 2,000 miles away in Cabo San Lucas, I knew exactly what was happening. I know my son. I know his habits. And I know that right about now, the initial high of escaping Mom and the kids was peaking. I could picture it perfectly. Louis and Rachel were seated at one of those open-air restaurants overlooking the ocean, the kind with white linen tablecloths and candles that flicker in the breeze. They would be on their second or third margarita, feeling that smug satisfaction of people who think they've cheated the system. They were probably laughing about me. I can hear Rachel's voice in my head, sharp and dismissive. I can't believe she actually came. It saved us a fortune. And Louis, my boy, would be nodding along, convincing himself that he did me a favor. Mom needed to get out of the house anyway. She loves the kids. It's a win-win. They would order the surf and turf. Louis always orders the most expensive thing on the menu when he thinks he has a safety net. They would eat their lobster tails and their ribeyes, toasting to their own cleverness, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already crumbled. The reality check would arrive with the check. Here is how the timeline played out. I know this because the banking alerts on my phone, which I still had access to, told the story better than any diary entry. At 8:45 p.m. Central Standard Time, a transaction was attempted at El Mirador Restaurant, Cabo. Amount, $425. Status, declined. I imagine the waiter walking back to their table. He would be polite, of course. He would lean down, trying to be discreet, holding the little black folder closed. "Sir," he would say, "I'm afraid there was an issue with the card." Louis would laugh it off. "Oh, probably a travel flag. Here, try this one." He would hand over his debit card, the one linked to the checking account where I used to deposit my little gifts. He didn't know that the $4,000 charge for the nanny had already hit the pending status. He didn't know that the pre-authorization hold for the hotel had eaten up the rest. At 8:48 p.m. Central Standard Time, attempt number 2. Status, declined. Insufficient funds. This is the moment the sweat starts. It's not the warm Cabo breeze anymore. It's the cold, prickly sweat of panic. I can see Louis checking his phone, his smile fading. "That doesn't make sense," he'd mutter. "I get paid on Friday. There should be plenty of room on the credit card." Rachel would be getting impatient. She hates looking poor. "Just fix it, Lou. People are looking." So he would open the banking app. That little app is a window into the soul of your finances, and what Louis saw in that window must have stopped his heart. First, he would see the balance. 0, or maybe negative, depending on the overdraft fees. Then, he would scroll down to the recent transactions list to see what happened. And there it was, the smoking gun. Pending, elite nanny and domestic staffing, Chicago, $4,150. I wonder if he read it twice. I wonder if he showed Rachel. I wonder if she screamed right there in the restaurant. Elite nanny. The realization would hit them like a rogue wave. Mom didn't just leave. Mom hired the most expensive replacement she could find, and she made us pay for it. Then, the second realization would hit. They were in a foreign country. They had eaten a $400 meal, and they had no way to pay for it. Back in my hotel room, my phone lit up on the side table. The screen flashed. A picture of Louis smiling from a few years ago popped up. "Incoming call, Louis." I stared at it. I took a sip of my tea. It was perfectly steeped. For years, that ringtone triggered a Pavlovian response in me. My heart would race. Does he need money? Is someone hurt? Do I need to fix something? I would answer on the first ring, breathless, ready to serve. BZCT, BZCT. Pick up, Mom. I whispered to the empty room, imagining him shouting into his phone in the restaurant bathroom. Pick up, pick up, pick up. He was probably frantic. He needed me to transfer money. He needed me to call the bank and authorize the charge. He needed me to cancel the nanny. He needed me to save him from the consequences of his own arrogance. I reached out and picked up the phone. The vibration buzzed against my palm. I looked at the accept button. Green. Inviting. The path of least resistance. The path back to being a doormat. Then I looked at the decline button. Red. Final. The color of a stop sign. I remembered the look on Rachel's face when she called me an old lady. I remembered the 10-hour flight with my aching back. I remembered the years of loans that were never repaid. I pressed the red button. Call declined. The room went silent again. I didn't block him. Not yet. I wanted him to know I was there. I wanted him to know I saw the call and chose not to answer. 10 seconds later, the phone buzzed again. Incoming call, Rachel. Oh, now Rachel wanted to talk. The woman who couldn't be bothered to look up from her iPad to greet me was suddenly desperate for a conversation. She probably wanted to yell. She probably wanted to threaten me. Or maybe she was going to try the family angle. I let it ring. I watched the name dance across the screen until it timed out and went to voicemail. Bing. A text message appeared. Louis, MOM. Answer the phone. Someone stole the card info. There is a $4,000 charge. We are stuck at the restaurant. Answer me. He still didn't get it. He thought it was fraud. He couldn't conceive of a world where his mother would actually spend his money on something for herself. Or rather, on the solution to the problem he created. Bing. Louis, Mom, please. The card is maxed. We can't pay the bill. They are threatening to call the police. Pick up. I set the phone back down on the table, face down. I wasn't going to save them. Not this time. They were two healthy adults with college degrees. They could figure it out. Maybe they could wash dishes. Maybe they could call Rachel's parents. Maybe they could sell those designer watches they bought last Christmas when they didn't have money to come visit me. It wasn't my problem. My problem was deciding what time to schedule my massage for the next morning. I stood up and walked to the window again. The snow was falling harder now, dusting the Chicago streets in white. It was beautiful. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the absence of weight. For the first time in forever, I wasn't carrying them. I had put the load down. Let them panic. Let them sweat. Let them feel, just for one night, what it feels like to be helpless and used. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room illuminated only by the city glow. I climbed into the king-sized bed. The sheets were crisp and cool, much better than the flannel in Louis's freezing guest room. My phone buzzed one more time on the nightstand, a desperate, angry vibration against the wood. I reached over and turned it off completely. Good night, Louis, I whispered, and I slept like a baby. I didn't turn my phone back on until 9 a.m. the next morning. I had slept for 9 solid hours, the kind of sleep where you don't move an inch. When I finally pressed the power button, the device nearly vibrated off the nightstand. It buzzed and pinged for a solid minute, flooding with missed calls, voicemails, and frantic text messages. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to hear Rachel's screeching or Louis's panic to know what had happened. The timeline was clear enough from the banking alerts. They hadn't stayed in Cabo. Of course they hadn't. When the credit card declined at dinner, that was just the first domino. The hotel would have been next. They would have asked for a card to keep on file for incidentals, or maybe the pre-authorization for the room finally tried to post and bounced because Mrs. Albright's fee had eaten up the available credit. They were stranded in a foreign country with no money and a maxed-out credit card. I can only imagine the humiliation. They probably had to make the one call they swore they never would, to Rachel's father. He's a hard man, not like me. He doesn't give loans. He gives lectures. I'm sure he bailed them out, but I'm also sure he made them beg for it. Then came the scramble to get home. You can't just change a flight during Christmas week for free. I checked the airline app out of curiosity. Same-day changes were running about $500 a ticket. They likely had to put that on a high-interest credit card, the kind they keep hidden in a wallet for real emergencies. They spent thousands of dollars to fly to Mexico, eat one dinner, get embarrassed, and fly right back. By the time I finished my breakfast, eggs Benedict, and fresh fruit, I got an email notification from Elite Staffing. Assignment concluded. Mrs. Albright has clocked out at 11 a.m. They were home. I sat by the window in my hotel room, sipping my coffee, and I let my mind travel back to that big brick house in the suburbs. I knew the layout of that kitchen better than my own hand. I knew exactly what scene was playing out. They would have walked in the door exhausted, wearing the same clothes they left in yesterday, smelling like airplane air and stress. They were probably ready to scream at me. They were probably rehearsing the speeches they were going to give. How could you do this to us? You ruined our vacation. You're selfish. But they didn't walk into a disaster. They walked into a sanctuary. Mrs. Albright is a professional. The house would be cleaner than when they left it. The laundry would be folded. The children would be calm, fed, and probably playing their new video games. There would be no chaos for them to yell about. There would be no crazy old grandma losing her mind. There was just the bill. Mrs. Albright would have met them at the door with her clipboard. She wouldn't offer sympathy. She would offer an invoice for any overtime incurred during their travel delay. She would hand them a report on the children's behavior, collect her things, and leave. And then it would just be Louie, Rachel, and the kitchen island. I pictured Louie walking into the kitchen to get a glass of water, his hand shaking. He would see it immediately. You couldn't miss it. The altar of truth. The platinum credit card, cut cleanly in two, resting on the granite like a dead insect. And right next to it, the spreadsheet. I imagined him picking up that piece of notebook paper. Louis is an accountant by trade. Numbers are his language. He couldn't ignore the columns. He couldn't spin the totals. November 2023. Mortgage assistance, $1,200. July 2024. Minivan repair, $2,000. Today, nanny service, $4,150. Total, $9,150. He would have to read every single line. Every single time I saved them. Every single time I sacrificed my own comfort so they could maintain the illusion of their wealthy lifestyle. And then he would see the sticky note. I am retired. The nanny is paid. Good luck. I wonder if Rachel tried to say something catty. I wonder if she tried to make a joke about me being petty. But looking at that cut credit card, even Rachel would have to shut up. You can call someone an old lady when they are washing your dishes for free. You can't call them names when they just dropped $4,000 to replace you with a professional because you weren't worth their time. The silence in that kitchen must have been deafening. For the first time, they couldn't gaslight me. They couldn't say, "Oh, Mom, you're exaggerating." The math was right there. They couldn't say, "We never asked for money." The dates were right there. They had to look at the cost of their own entitlement. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message. My heart gave a little squeeze. Old habits die hard, but I didn't pick it up immediately. I finished my coffee. I watched a pigeon land on the windowsill. I took a deep breath. Then I picked up the phone. "Louis, Mom, we're home." We saw the note. 3 dots danced on the screen. He was typing, then stopping, then typing again. He was struggling. Good. He should struggle. "Louis, I don't know what to say. This isn't who we are. We love you." I stared at the screen, and for the first time in my life, I laughed at my son. A dry, humorless laugh. This isn't who we are. It is exactly who they are. They are people who take. They are people who assume. They are people who mistook kindness for weakness and silence for stupidity. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "I'll pay you back." He just tried to smooth it over with a vague denial of reality. He wanted me to text back and say, "It's okay, honey, I understand." He wanted me to fix the emotional tension, just like I fixed the financial tension. I looked at the cut credit card in my mind's eye. I didn't type a response. I didn't need to. The silence I was giving him now was heavier than any paragraph I could write. I put the phone down. I had a massage scheduled for 11:30, and I didn't want to carry this tension into the spa. They were home. The kids were safe. The lesson had been delivered. Now, they had to live in the house I helped pay for, with the memories of the vacation they couldn't afford, and the realization that the safety net was gone. I stood up and tightened the belt of my robe. I felt vindicated. It wasn't a happy feeling, exactly. It was more like the relief you feel when a fever finally breaks. The sickness was gone. I could see clearly now. I walked to the door of my hotel room. I was going to enjoy my holiday. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, alone, unbothered, and entirely paid for by myself. I flew back to Florida on December 26th. I didn't ask Louis for a ride to the airport. I didn't ask him to carry my bags. I didn't even tell him which flight I was on. I simply checked out of the Palmer House Hilton, took a cab to O'Hare, and bought a sandwich at the terminal with my own money. The flight home was different than the flight there. On the way up, I had been anxious, my back aching with every bump of turbulence, my mind racing with thoughts of how to make everyone happy. On the way back, I sat in my window seat and watched the clouds roll by. My back still hurt. I'm 68. That doesn't just go away, but the heaviness in my chest was gone. I hadn't seen Louis or Rachel since I walked out of their house. Some people might think that's cold. They might ask, how could you leave without hugging your son goodbye? But those people haven't sat in a kitchen and been told they were worthless except for their ability to scrub dishes. I didn't need to say goodbye. My absence was the goodbye. When I unlocked the front door of my little house in Sarasota, the rush of warm, stagnant air hit me. It smelled like dust and old books, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I walked through the rooms, turning on lights. My cat, Mittens, wound herself around my ankles, purring loudly. She was happy to see me. She didn't want my credit card. She just wanted me. I unpacked my suitcase. I put the clothes in the wash. I put the toiletries away. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat on my lanai with a glass of iced tea and just listened to the wind in the palm trees. Usually, when I get back from a trip to see family, I spend the first week worrying. Did I help enough? Do they think I'm getting too old? Should I send a little extra money to say thank you for hosting me? This time, my mind was quiet. I checked my phone. There were a few texts from Louis over the last 2 days. They were tentative. "Merry Christmas, Mom. We miss you. Hope you got home safe." He was testing the waters. He wanted to see if I was still the same Aaron who would rush to reassure him. He wanted to see if the ATM was open for business again. I texted back, "Home safe. Happy New Year." Brief, polite, distant. I didn't offer to pay for the flight change fees I knew they had incurred. I didn't offer to help with the credit card bill that was coming due. That was their mess. They were 40 years old. If they could figure out how to book a luxury vacation to Cabo, they could figure out how to pay for their own mistakes. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook. It's a habit I have at the end of every month. Usually this is a stressful time. I look at my pension, I look at Social Security, and I try to squeeze out enough to help Louis while keeping my own lights on. But this month, the math was different. I looked at the line item for family support. It was usually the biggest expense in my budget. Between the random transfers, the gifts, and the emergency bailouts, I was sending them nearly $1,000 a month on average. I took my pen and drew a line through that category. 0. I stared at the number. If I wasn't supporting them, I actually had money. I had spare money. I looked out the window at my garden. The hibiscus bushes were overgrown. The lawn was patchy. For years, I had been mowing it myself, pushing that heavy machine in the Florida heat because I couldn't afford a landscaper. I told myself it was good exercise, but the truth was, it hurt. It left me exhausted for days. I picked up the phone and called the number on the side of the truck I always saw parked down the street. Rodriguez Landscaping. A man answered. "Hi," I said. "I'd like to hire someone to take care of my yard. Mowing, trimming, everything. And I want to plant some new hydrangeas. We can come out for an estimate today." He said, "Don't worry about the estimate." I said, feeling a little thrill. "Just come. I can afford it." When the landscaper came later that afternoon, I sat on the porch and watched him work. It was hypnotic. He trimmed the hedges perfectly. He edged the driveway. He did in an hour what would have taken me a week of painful labor. I sipped my tea and realized something profound. I had been treating myself worse than I treated my own children. I was willing to break my back to save them money, but I wasn't willing to spend a dime to save my own body. That stopped today. I still love Louis. A mother never stops loving her child. But I realized that loving him doesn't mean enabling him. By saying no, by cutting that card, I forced him to face his own life. I forced him to look at his wife and his finances without his mother as a buffer. Maybe they will fight. Maybe they will struggle. Maybe they will have to sell that big house and move into something they can actually afford. And that would be the best thing that ever happened to them. You don't grow when you're comfortable. You grow when you have to figure it out. As the sun started to set, painting the Florida sky in shades of purple and orange, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't lonely. I was solitary. There is a difference. I am 68 years old. I have lived for my husband. I have lived for my children. I have lived for my grandchildren. Now, finally, I am going to live for Aaron. If your family needed you all the time but never gave back, would you keep saying yes? Or would you finally say no and take your life back? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.